repel the Space Invaders, take missile command, face the asteroids. I've got to save the Earth.
Can you dig it, gamers? The 70s just keep on trucking. These are the video game years, and welcome to 1978.
Hot diggity damn, it's 1978.
An incredible year that sent kids to the local arcade as video games went global.
Before video games were only in the United States.
1978 introduced new influences like Invaders from Space and Japan.
That becomes a national phenomenon.
Magnavox tries again.
Available now. Programmed by you.
The world gets a new controller.
I love playing games with a trackball. They give you a really precise amount of control.
Plus the Pong paddle strikes back. And Simon demands your attention.
Push green, push red, push yellow, push blue. Push till you're blue in the face.
So book it to your nearest toy store, Jack, because these are the video game years, and this is 1978.
We especially like Space Invaders, zapping those little devils from outer space. It's fun, but personally I think the whole idea of creatures from outer space is a little far-fetched.
Most influential game of all time, Space Invaders, bar none. There is no contest whatsoever.
Man, I love Space Invaders so much, I even went out and bought a shirt. Look at this.
It's not Space Invaders, it's Galaxian. What's the matter with you?
Japan created something that was going to take the world by storm in Space Invaders.
Before this point, Japan had no influence over the video game industry. I mean, it was Atari and that was it.
It went global before video games were only in the United States, and after Space Invaders, it was everywhere. It was international.
You have to realize that World War II just ended like a little over 3 decades earlier, and Japan was still coming through this economic miracle.
Oh, Japan, you so crazy.
Americans were pretty stuck on thinking stuff from Japan was still kind of crappy.
Japan was at its infancy with, as far as being a chip supplier. So it was kind of weird that you see a Japanese company using American-made products for its machines.
Doc is like, well, no wonder the circuit failed. It was made in Japan. And then Marty's like, what do you mean, Doc? All the best stuff's made in Japan.
All of a sudden, Taito shows up with Space Invaders, and that becomes a national phenomenon.
Space Invaders was developed by one man. He did the programming, he did the art, he even made the hardware.
Taito.
Taito had its first international success. It wasn't super blockbuster, but their first success with Gunfight.
Midway got the license for Space Invaders, and they got a huge hit.
Amazing hit. It was released in arcades in America late '78 and around the middle of the year in Japan.
Midway had their own version, Taito, who released the game, and Japan had their own version, and there's, not only was there physical differences, but the Japanese version actually had a joystick, whereas the American version had only buttons, which was kind of neat.
The cool backlit with the moon on the bottom. Yeah, some of the versions had that. I like some of the cocktail versions had the the cellophane overlays that gave you the different colors. It was they used what they could at the time. Yeah.
I guess it's considered an early shooter, but your guy is a tank.
It's a tank. It's a cannon of some sort.
It's like you're a tank, but fighting aliens.
Yeah, you're not even a spaceship. You're behind a little bunker.
It's a game that has no ending. It keeps going. Waves and waves of more attack. It gets harder and harder. It's one of those games that when you first play, almost anyone can get past the first level, but second, third, fourth, it gets tough.
You're like at the bottom, and you got like these little bases like above you, just a little bit above you, and you gotta hide behind them.
You're shooting little pellets at the Space Invaders.
Pellets at aliens doing line dancing.
There is a defined line that you have to defend. Yes. It's Earth. If you lose, no one will ever know what a chocolate malt tastes like ever again.
Yeah.
You screwed up. You're the last line of defense. And
well, those and those green blobby shields that really just got in your way most of the time. But...
What were those made out of? Algae?
I don't know.
Amount of enemies they had on the screen took up so much processing power for the game that as you destroy the enemies, obviously, if you've ever played the game, you realize the enemies speed up as you destroy more of them.
It really makes your heart start beating. The beads of sweat, you know, kind of gather on your forehead and whatnot, and it's very, very traumatizing.
That's a bug, not a feature, because the processor can handle things faster as more and more enemies are destroyed.
There is such an impending sense of dread when you play Space Invaders, and I am terribly stressed at all times. I think what really does it is
The sound in Space Invaders was panic attack inducing.
Early version of the two-step.
Yeah. It's like Achy Breaky Heart, except it's except the Space Invaders, they're invading.
Yes. Bum, 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 bum.
And then you get locked into a zone and you're shooting, and then that UFO sound comes out.
You're like, oh my god! And then you get bonus points if you hit it.
Right. Space Invaders was kind of a pioneer for the arcade because this was the game that introduced the high score.
Basically what it was, it started bragging rights in games.
Space Invaders brought that challenge, like, I've got to beat his high score. I've got to beat his high score.
Competition. Dudes are competitive. That's it, period. You know, there was lines wrapped around the block. You know, next person throws his quarter up.
It made people come back to play the game.
And now when I get my high score and it's always better than yours, I have Space Invaders to thank.
And so you want to play against your friends or anyone you know locally and go for the high scores.
I'm better than you at everything, including arts and crafts, and you know it.
So you're pumping quarters in. So that's one of the reasons why in Japan there was actually a coin shortage.
Reportedly, there is a shortage of 100 yen coins, which is what the machines took.
And Japan just ran out of them. Like, how does that even happen?
The Japanese mint had to manufacture extra 100 yen coins.
Here's an idea. Tokens.
Supposedly the same kind of thing happened after the game was released in America with quarters, but you know, some of this stuff back in the dark ages of the 70s, you could never confirm.
Space Invaders was such a phenomenon that some stores in Japan got rid of their stock of vegetables and whatever else they were selling to turn their stores into Space Invaders stores. That'd be like Hallmark throwing out all their cards to make their store like a Angry Birds store.
Arcades were throwing, game rooms were throwing pachinko machines out to make room for Space Invaders.
Even a lot of the companies that we know nowadays make video games, like Nintendo and Taito, well, they were producing pachinko machines.
Or as we call it in America on The Price is Right, Plinko.
What's pachinko, you ask?
Now, pachinko is like a vertical pinball game where you basically you flick a metal ball, which ding 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 and falls down through a bunch of shit.
Kind of a simple game, actually. You have these small little silver marbles. You basically just flip the little flipper, the marbles go down, and if you land in here, you win more marbles. It's like gambling, but not with money.
But you could win basically tokens that you could exchange for things that you could sell for money.
I'll never replace you for Space Invaders.
A lot of people credit the dominance of the Atari 2600 to Space Invaders when it was released on the console in 1980.
Let's hook it up to the TV.
Those are supposed to be the Space Invaders you get with your missiles.
Wow!
That's it, Uncle Frank. You saved our planet.
Yeah, this time.
The first home console game you had to have because it was the first arcade hit you had to play.
And so there was a ton of different options in this. So there was one where you basically can have it where your shields like wiggle back and forth.
Right, wiggle, 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 yeah.
Yeah, the aliens fire would wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. There's a lot of wiggle, wiggle, wiggle in this.
There was a lot of wiggle, wiggle, wiggle in 1978.
Oh yeah, there was.
It gave Atari a pretty good advantage because if you had a choice between other systems like the Odyssey 2 or the APF, you had to go for the Atari. You had to get Space Invaders. You had to do it.
The greatest scourge caused by Space Invaders wasn't the Japanese shop owners abandoning their goods or the depletion of the 100 yen coin. It was that craptastic pop song, Space Invaders.
You had a music video for it, and you had some weird robot guys walking around like androids with like glowing eyes. It had nothing to do with Space Invaders, really.
Astrocade, the professional video game system that gives you 4-player capability, 3 built-in games, a calculator, and these new cartridges. Creative Crayon. Even the young can make beautiful pictures. The Incredible Wizard has a dungeon of surprises for you. You can even create your own games with Astrocade Basic, the easy computer teaching cartridge. Astrocade, the home entertainment sensation that's a personal computer, too.
January 1978. A new competitor arrives.
Step right up, come one, come all. Be amazed by the Bally Professional Arcade.
You mean the video system that came out where it was very limited and was very buggy and people had to return it because it didn't work?
That's the one.
Hey, you gotta play with the big boys? You gotta, you gotta put up with that, and you gotta be prepared,
And they couldn't handle any of the problems that they were having with the initial batch of systems, so they really found themselves kind of like killing themselves in a way.
As with many new systems, there are often defects and returns that plague early adopters. However, Bally was new to the home console market, so they didn't really know how to deal with the logistics. I'm glad that doesn't happen anymore nowadays. Red Ring of Death.
Xbox 360. Xbox.
You could order it in 1977 in catalogs and so forth, but it turns out they weren't quite ready to push the thing out the door, so they had to wait till 78.
Hey son, guess what I'm getting you for Christmas? What, Dad? The Bally Home Entertainment Arcade System.
Oh boy!
Oh really?
Yeah.
I can't wait to open that on Christmas Day. Oh, wait a minute, Junior. It's not going to be here till January. Oh.
And they were an amusement company. They weren't a retail company. So they were not very familiar with what was required behind making a retail product.
They've done a lot of things in life of the company. From 1930s when they first started making slot machines, to the 40s they made parts for World War II, the 50s they started doing coffee vending machines, and they also had a short-lived music label company. And it's no surprise, somewhere down the line they purchased Midway Games to get into the video game market.
Bally and Midway had an arcade business.
Eventually it was Bally and then merged with Midway and became Bally Midway.
Didn't sell a huge amount. It wasn't sold in a lot of stores, only computer stores, not regular retail stores, so that really hurt it.
And I wouldn't exactly call Bally's console here a success. I mean, it stuck around for a few more years and had some name changes.
And if you're still hungry for excitement, how about the Munchie game? Astro Arcade, the home entertainment sensation that's a personal computer, too.
It's the professional system. Right. Well, until we change the name to Astrocade, which makes no sense a few years later.
I mean, they changed the name like 4 times. Okay. Game Straight, you want to know about it. He probably has every version.
So this is the home library computer, the Bally Home Library Computer. This is only available, this version was only available through mail order and only sold in New York City area.
When I was a kid, anytime I did a mail order for something, it ended up being crap. Amazing live sea monkeys my foot.
But by 1978, what they decided to do was they decided to rename it the Bally Professional Arcade and market it in stores, in retail stores.
But the only stores you could buy it in were computer stores. Because again, they didn't know what you needed to do as a retail company.
But they were missing out on the most important market. Kids. There's no force greater than kids screaming in the middle of a department store, I want it!
I mean, why would little junior son of a bitch be in a computer store?
The hardware on this thing was actually pretty impressive.
Literally the best home system on the market.
Yeah, it was better than the VCS, which came out the year before. It was top of the line when it came out.
Bally supported 4 players, up to 4. It came with 2 controllers only, but you can buy an extra 2. 4-player action in the late 70s? That was unheard of.
The Bally Astrocade has some of the best controllers for any vintage system out there. Here's the Bally Astrocade controller. As you can see, almost looks like a handgun, a handle. This is your trigger button right here, your action button. And then your left hand, this is the knob up top. You can turn around and twist. You actually move it around like a directional pad. Really advanced for a system that came out in the late 70s.
When you listen to the Bally machine, it actually sounds like sound effects that you would hear in an arcade.
It had the best colors, the best sound. It had arcade sound.
When you're comparing this to arcade ports that were on the VCS at the time, it's steps above.
Yeah. And it even came with a version of BASIC. It was based off of Tiny Basic.
It's still within the realm where computers and video game systems are blurred, so they're trying to put, you know, productivity applications on certain things, thinking that, you know, when the kid's done playing the game, maybe dad can use it to balance the ledger.
It was marketed as more than just a kid's toy.
Well, on the front of the console, there were some numbers and keys.
And in order to program anything in like the alphanumerics or the commands, each key had 4 possible commands, and you had to hit a certain shift. There were like 3 shift buttons that were colored.
It was more expensive. It was $100 more expensive than the Atari VCS or even the Odyssey 2. It was a $300 system in 1978.
$270, I think I saw once in an old Montgomery Ward catalog, which inflation adjusted is $960.
When the Sega CD came out, it was $300, and that was prohibitively expensive, and that was like 20 years later.
That's why they probably call it professional system. They want to differentiate from the Atari and say this is like the big one.
The Bally Professional Arcade was essentially the Neo Geo of the time.
Initially, when Bally released the home library computer, they had envisioned it not to only be a home computer system for the home market, but they were going to have stand-up arcade machines as well with the Astrocade or home library computer running the arcade.
There wasn't a huge amount of games in the Bally library. There's only a few dozen, so that also was not good for it. And there wasn't a lot of ports. There was a Wizard of War port, however. That was pretty good.
Yes.
It sounded very authentic to the arcade. Not exactly, you couldn't pull up exactly, but pretty close for, you know, 78.
If you wanted to replicate the arcade experience at home, even though there were only about 50 games that eventually came out for the thing, the Bally Professional Arcade was the way to go.
I don't have a huge amount of experience with it, but I respect the Bally Professional / Astrocade.
And now, Pat Contri presents the pop culture of 1978 that inspired gaming.
Pat here with the 1978 pop culture moments that inspired video games.
This year, Superman brings you the gift of flight.
Superman, the movie, starring Christopher Reeve. A near-perfect superhero movie, with the exception of that creepy "Can you read my mind" scene with Margot Kidder. Ugh.
And an animated Star Wars story on the Star Wars Holiday Special.
The Star Wars Holiday Special. Trippy Jefferson Airplane music video. Wookiees yelling at each other for a half hour. B. Arthur.
Excuse me.
But we got a glimpse of Boba Fett for the first time.
Come back soon. I'll be waiting.
And now, when David Banner grows angry or outraged, a startling metamorphosis occurs.
The Incredible Hulk TV show. See Bill Bixby get his ass kicked for almost an hour before he hulks up and throws 2x4s at bad guys. Battlestar Galactica. Sure, it was mostly a Star Wars ripoff, but it was fun, and there wasn't any B. Arthur. And that was the pop culture of 1978 that inspired video games. Remember, there's other things in the world besides video games. They're just less important.
Coming up on part 2 of the video game years, 1978.
Odyssey 2 was released, which is curious because there were like 50 Odysseys before that.
Magnavox is back, and they're serious.
This really cool invention called the trackball come into play.
Ah, the trackball.
A pool cue ball that sticks out of the top of the control panel. You gotta slap it around to control the game.
You could blister your hand to the point where you wouldn't be able to play anymore.